instructions for the phone, press *6 to mute and unmute yourself, and then *9 to raise your hand. I'll also be looking at the participant list, and we'll be able to tell if people are raising their hand, and we'll call on you if you would like. This is just a slide showing where the Zoom chat is. So you should all at the bottom of your screen see a little icon that says chat. So if you click on that, you'll have the option to message all participants or select participants. So please feel free to use that feature if you have any comments or questions that you'd like to get out there. And we will move to Water Quality Control Division introductions. Brandy, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, hi, I'm Brandy Honeycutt with the Water Quality Control Division, and I work on Reg 84 in the permits section.
And Meg?
Hi, I'm Meg Parrish. I'm the permit section manager for the Water Quality Control Division. Thank you all so much for coming. We are getting a lot out of these stakeholder meetings, and we're really glad you're here.
Awesome. Nathan?
Oh, I'm not muted. This is Nathan Moore. I'm the Compliance and Enforcement Section Manager at the Water Quality Control Division. And sorry, I'm stuffing my face real quick. I'm running from meeting to meeting today. Well, sitting from meeting to meeting today.
This is Liz Lamont, and I also work with the compliance unit under Nathan in reclaimed water.
Great. And then Marianne, if you're on.
This is Marianne Nason. I'll be supporting Caitlin in facilitating this meeting.
And I'm Caitlin, and we also have Colin, who is here to help us with some of the back-end Zoom administration. And so then with this, we should move on. And Brandy, if you want to take over.
All right. Yes, thank you everyone for being here today. If I'm looking to this side, it's because I'm using 2 monitors today, and so it doesn't mean I'm just staring into space. I'm looking at a different screen, but also still very engaged in this meeting. So this stakeholder process has been really helpful. We just wanted to kind of recap a little bit about our last meeting in July. We received great feedback on some definitions to be taken out of Reg 84, some new definitions to be added. We discussed clarification language about impoundments to go into Reg 84 to make that more clear. And we received feedback from stakeholders on consolidating some of the BMPs. And those were education and training, cross-connection, and agronomic rate, runoff, and ponding. We weren't able to get through all the material in our last meeting, so we're hoping to get through today's material. So that's why it's so important to stick to the agenda. And we are going to revisit impoundments just for a short amount of time, and we're going to kind of start over again with some of the BMPs and just make sure we didn't miss any comments or concerns around cross-connection or the ag rate piece that we talked about last time, just because it was rushed at the end of the meeting. So the goals of today's meeting are to finish collecting feedback on proposed consolidated BMPs, collect ideas from you all on a term to use for best management practices or additional conditions, as they are referred to as both of those things in Reg currently. We're going to do a quick discussion on a slight update to the impoundment language. And then the division and stakeholders will kind of have a discussion on treater, site manager, and user roles and responsibilities, and talk about how these responsibilities and roles could be better clarified in Reg 84, and discuss the idea of having a site manager for all uses. And then at the end, try to get through to discuss and obtain ideas on Reg 84 structure. So to start, we'll do the consolidation of best management practices. For those of you who weren't here in our last meeting, we did a polling process through Zoom poll. So the intent of this section is to show some areas where the reg has repetition around one particular topic. And then the division will kind of show sort of a consolidated version of that BMP that would apply to all uses. And then stakeholders can discuss their thoughts. And then at the end of our discussion, we'll take a little poll on whether you all agree or disagree with consolidating that BMP and the language that we are proposing as an idea. Pardon me. So we're going to do cross connection again, just because last time we were so rushed. So for cross connection, in some areas, licensed plumbers are required to do cross connection inspections and certifications. In other areas like the local systems, there has to be cross connection control for off-spec water. There's cross connection required for potable connections. Testing must be done by a certified technician. And for indoor uses, there's specifics around a certified technician doing a test prior to reclaimed water use and then at intervals thereafter. And also cross connection is required when you supplement reclaimed water with any other water source. So it's listed quite a bit in Reg 84 in a lot of different areas. So the idea would be to have, cross connection control required for all other water sources. It must be an approved device or method. There should be an initial test and then interval testing by a certified cross connection control technician. And it should be practiced also when attaching any conveyances or other equipment to where reclaimed water had been used before. And then the cross connection control program would be described in the user plan to comply. So that being said, what are folks' thoughts on this? We're just going to open it up for discussion. Okay, well, since we did do this last time, I guess that's great. We collected those thoughts last time. We will go ahead and do the Zoom poll, Caitlin, just to reaffirm what folks are thinking. So if you all could take a second to fill this out.
Hey, Brandy, this is Damian Heim with Denver Water.
Hi, Damien.
Hi. Are we considering this for, you may have mentioned this, I was distracted a little bit, for initial conversions or ongoing, and at what frequency?
I'm sorry, I don't know if I understand the question. Like converting like a potable system to reclaimed water system, or?
Yep, or a new development. Is this a requirement initially or ongoing, and if ongoing, at what frequency?
I would say that yes, an initial inspection would be required and cross connection control would be required in that case. And interval tests or interval inspections would be required, yes. I mean, I think the idea is that, cross connection control should be applied when connected to any other water source at any time, and that there should be an inspection program that's ongoing.
And so what frequency would we want to have that? So the testing, are we talking about just the backflow prevention device?
Yeah, just making sure that it's functioning properly is what we were thinking. Yeah.
Understood.
And we did not come up with a frequency.
And right now, those frequencies should be identified in the treater's compliance program. There's a name for that. I'm drawing a blank on it, but you're required to have the document program that you implement to ensure that users comply with the requirements to maximum extent practicable. But we're not currently defining that frequency.
So this is Sherry Scuderi with City of Aurora. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Yeah, it's so hard because you get no reaction. You're like, So I'm
sorry, I'm always listening.
This is going to overlap with what we have on the drinking water side, and so I don't know, maybe we can think about that a little bit, because if it's on the drinking water side, that should be covered under those regulations, and we wouldn't want to have to duplicate that. So, and even on that side, the frequency, just to answer that question, is yearly. So anyway, I just think that's something we need to keep in mind, that we don't necessarily need to double regulate ourselves.
That makes sense. Well, I mean, I guess, yeah, so I suppose in the case where reclaimed water or potable water is supplementing reclaimed water, then the cross connection program is already there. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
Yeah. So I think, you know, in that case, we could probably, I mean, in the user plan to comply, it would just say that the drinking water cross connection program and spell out what that program looks like, and that would cover it, I think.
So
This does expand beyond potable water cross connection, potentially to other well systems, as you know, just as a.
So well systems as in drinking water wells or raw water? What, I mean.
Raw water.
So raw water is in, okay.
Water that's not drinking water.
Yeah, no, I'm
Yeah.
just sorry. I'm thinking out loud, I guess, about what that sort of looks like in that, how you would try to define that, I guess.
This is Dave Takeda. So as we talk about this, the initial and interval testing. So if this were a category 3 or 3+ system, this would apply to all of the homes in that system. Yes, no?
That's something I hadn't thought about.
I mean, the requirements for
Okay.
cross connections apply wherever reclaimed water is present. You know, in most cases, I would think that the cross connection, you know, that the system would be divorced from the potable water system in a residential neighborhood. However, the obligation would still fall on the treater. And again, we're not being prescriptive in this, but within the treater's program for compliance oversight of the users, it should address, you know, some basic considerations if you're going to be supplying these to homes on how are you going to make sure that homeowners aren't tapping incorrectly into the reclaimed water system into their, you know, to their home. But again, we haven't prescribed the method for that.
When we went through on the last redo of Reg 84, and a lot of, or what I was paying attention to anyway, was on the 3+. I think we wrote in there that the service, the reuse irrigation service to the home can't enter the home. So it comes in and it's completely external. And so that's why I'm wondering, you know, I can see, because we're building homes right now, but I can see that, you know, we can send an operator in or get a technician and verify on the initial build that there's no cross connection. We can get that certification. That makes sense. But for it to be an ongoing thing for homeowners or someone to be responsible, I just want to, not sure how practical that is to be able to force a homeowner to get them to do that. And we went through, again, I think that specific clause where, you know, we can't bring the reuse service into the house. So I would be a little bit hesitant to just go all in. I think it may make sense for businesses if they may have some sort of internal service, internal pipe inside the building, but on homes, I need to think about that.
Are you saying you think it doesn't make sense to be responsible for? I'm not. Can you clarify what you're? I didn't follow that.
Well, I mean, if we're going to have, again, interval testing, so whatever frequency it may be, to have a homeowner, so the home's been occupied and it's moved into, to come back on a yearly basis and say, oh, well, by the way, people who live here at this house, you have to have a certification of cross connection control by some technician. is that practical? I mean, it may make sense, but is that practical?
And I don't think we're prescribing a certification on, I mean, you got to certify potable water cross connection backflow devices, but I don't think we're prescribing a technician certification. We're prescribing that the treater is responsible for developing a program to provide oversight to make sure cross connections haven't occurred at these systems. So that could look at like several things when it comes to a residential system. Number one would be some level of education. And number two could be just including a evaluation during any other field oversight that occurs for compliance with the other BMPs. You know, is there evidence of a water line dug into where the system is? Making sure your inspectors who's responsible for that knows where the system is, things of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, there's that kind of educational program and those types of things, but the language says initial and interval testing. So I would interpret interval testing meaning that, you know, it's some sort of test that's done after the home's been occupied for, you know, the long term.
We'll have to talk about this more internally, but maybe the word testing isn't the right word to use.
Okay.
And then Brandy, we do have a thought in the chat as well.
Oh, hold on. Can somebody tell me what that is?
Yeah, Susan Oster, so sorry if I'm mispronouncing, says, wouldn't the initial and interval testing only apply if there is a cross-connection device? If there is no connection, no need for a cross-connection device.
Correct.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, anything else on this? All righty. Thank you all for that. That was helpful. So the other best management practice that we wanted to try to consolidate deals with ponding and runoff and agronomic rate. Obviously, agronomic rate doesn't apply to every use because in some cases, a lot of cases, you're not irrigating anything. But, you know, so throughout the regulation, if it is irrigation, an ag rate analysis is required. For washing activities, ponding and runoff have to be minimized. In some cases, you know, prevention is written into the reg. For food crops, we added that flood and sheet irrigation are prohibited. And really just kind of the fate of any wastewater has to be contained and not discharged. So really the whole goal of all of these is to not create a discharge to state waters through ponding runoff or exceedance of the agronomic rate. So the idea would be to kind of address ponding and runoff in one consolidated best management practice where it would say minimize ponding and runoff for irrigation or dust suppression, because in those types of uses, a little bit of ponding and runoff is just something that will happen. And then in other uses, prevent ponding and runoff, and then have a requirement to repair leaks immediately or discontinue reclaimed water use until they are repaired. If it is irrigation of crops or landscape, then the agronomic rate would be applied, and flood and sheet irrigation would be prohibited. And any wastewater that's unused would need to be done so in a way that prevents a discharge to state waters or could have a discharge permit. So with that being said, what are your all's thoughts?
This is Asta from Riverwater.
Okay, Asta, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
I'll try the chat box.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not savvy with what's going on right now. Let's see.
Brandy, this is Donnie while Asta's typing. I have a couple of concerns that we still have some vague language, like immediately. That's a pretty vague term on what that means when you're actually dealing with a leak. I mean, does it mean
right.
Discover this leak, you have to shut down and leave it shut down? Or I think we just need some guidance around that, or something, because for some irrigators, a small leak, they'll want to go ahead, it might be an impact, but they'll come back and mitigate the small little pond. And it's sometimes not even a pond, it's a little tiny puddle, but they'll go ahead and let their system finish its cycle and then come back and shut everything down. I think that, and then they'll sweep up the little puddle, or I don't know what they actually do. Some of them might siphon it into a container and dump it back onto the turf or whatever. So that was one of my concerns on just the feasibility of what immediately means. And then I had another one that if we roll this into a general BMP, are we still only looking at applying it to certain uses, or like your slide says prevent for all other uses? Well, if you go through the list of all of our currently approved uses, some of them don't have any reference to a BMP to address ponding currently. So it would be a new requirement for those uses. So.
Well, I think the idea is really to prevent ponding and runoff in all instances, but I do understand there are some uses where it may not really apply. But I mean, even if an indoor use, we don't want to see ponding of reclaimed water indoors either. Just stagnant reclaimed water isn't something that we want to see. And I think in a lot of ways, prevention of it would be easy with these other uses, but it's definitely something to think about a little bit more. I guess I'm wondering if there's the specific use studying that you think it would be like impractical or infeasible to do.
I guess my concern on that one isn't infeasible or practicality. It's that, to me, it's asking for a new requirement on an existing use. And I'm not sure that was stated in the scope of this modification or discussion or whatever. But I mean, it has, I mean, like, some of the industrial processes do not list it. The only process that lists ponding for industrial is evaporative process, I think. I don't have my old reg open, sorry, but
it's okay.
So it's just a concern that, are we coming out of the scope of what this process was supposed to be discussing? And we do have uses that, I mean, I'm not familiar with all the uses, like my zoo doesn't use reclaimed water, so I don't know if it's feasible for them to address ponding and prevent it.
Right.
I mean, they may be able to minimize it, but can they prevent it? So I'm not the expert at all. I just wanted to bring it up.
Yes, I appreciate it. That is something we can, take back and think about a little bit more and make sure that we're not, make sure that it makes sense.
This is Meg. Then in terms of your comment about sort of the scope, I mean, this is a pretty broad stakeholder process, and I think we've given it quite a bit of time. And as part of that, pieces of it are going to be looking at the new requirements. If it does make sense to have any new requirements on existing uses, as well as looking at sort of some of those new uses and things like that we've been talking about. So we do think that things like this are very much within the scope of this potential rulemaking process, and we think it's important for there to be a discussion about them.
And I do want to just take a really high level regulatory philosophical look at the kind of the question of where requirements are kind of black and white versus caveated. And that's just kind of, and again, I'm not meaning to shut down conversations about where flexibility might be needed in the reg, but in general, it becomes impossible to develop a reg that would prevent all cases of non-compliance. So there is, I mean, essentially to you know, like, let's take the word immediately. You know, the expectation is that spills be stopped immediately. Will there be situations where a reasonable person doesn't get a spill stopped immediately because it's negligible, they didn't notice it, and then they let the irrigation cycle continue before shutting down? That might be the case, but to try to develop a reg that caveats the situations to prevent that reasonable person from having a violation becomes really difficult. And it's just the very nature of these regulations, be it a wastewater treatment plant where you might have a one-time burp with an exceedance, or a construction site where the wind blows your silt fence down, or irrigation site that has a leak. You know, the violations will occur that are not ones that drive a enforcement response from either the treater or the state. That there's got to be a reasonable look at a response to a non-compliance. And same with, you know, ponding. Yeah, you might not be able to always, in practice, prevent ponding, but the requirements have to say prevent ponding to allow for an enforceable rule. And you know, again, that's kind of a philosophical discussion, but it is something that it's hard. It's easy to get caught up into overthinking these and trying to caveat everything. And in general, we want to avoid that, in my opinion.
And then Brandy, we do have another question in the chat.
Okay.
From Shayna Oliver. She wants to know if this will impact well water uses.
This BMP about consolidation of, or I'm sorry, of ponding, runoff, and ag rate, this one, or were you talking about cross connection?
It looks like the chat came in during this discussion of ponding, runoff, ag
Okay,
rate.
great. This would just apply to reclaimed water. So just the regulation 84 water.
I do want to clarify real quick, because it is worth mentioning that well water that is mixed with reclaimed water is now all reclaimed water. But if it is solely and separate from reclaimed water, then no, it would not be subject to the same requirements. However, you can't mix reclaimed water and pond water, or well water together and still have it be, excuse me, at that point it becomes reclaimed water.
And then Bridget Walsh also has a question. She would like to know how you plan to enforce this in schoolyard gardens.
I'll take that really quickly because it is kind of outside the scope of this meeting, which is setting the requirements. But that, you know, quickly, the answer is we do have an inspection program at the state where we inspect reclaimed water use sites and treaters for compliance, and have processes and authority to hold them responsible for non-compliance. So since we don't have a school garden using this yet, we haven't developed the fine points of that process yet. And we have one inspector currently.
Okay, yeah, great.
Okay. All
Hey,
right.
Brandy?
If there's nothing else, we'll just do the quick poll and then, oh,
Hey,
yes.
Brandy? Brandy, this is John Hanzo
Yes.
at Aurora.
Hey, John.
Just got how you doing there? So
Doing
I've got
fine.
a couple of like comments, questions here. The area about repair leaks immediately, it almost makes sense that that should be pulled out, because that is one of the areas that seems to be, you know, kind of a hot issue, but maybe that could be pulled out of here and actually made as a standalone type condition or management practice. That one looks like we might be able to, you know, address it easier as a standalone as opposed to having it within here. So that's kind of a comment. Second request is ag rate application. I was wondering if the state could provide either a standard formula or some mechanism of being able to develop that ag rate or identify that ag rate, so that the user and the treater will all be on, all three will be on the same page. We have one mathematical formula and everybody uses it. There's no, you know, discussions. It's just nice and easy and pretty clean. And the last one is that fate of wastewater. I mean, isn't that fate of reclaimed water? That's I just kind of want clarification on that, if you don't mind, please.
Yes, that would be reclaimed water. Yes. I think the reason we use the term wastewater in the reg now is because it's like wastewater from reclaimed water. It's like leftover after you use the reclaimed water is sort of what the term is referring to. If that makes sense.
No, it should maintain its own standard as reclaimed water. It hasn't transferred over to any other regulation at that point in time still. It's still reclaimed water. I mean, that's part of what we have been just talking about for a long time.
Right.
I don't think that it didn't move over into another regulation or another requirement. It's just, this is all still reclaimed water.
Yeah,
So,
the intention isn't to consider it a
Right.
different water.
Right.
It's
right, that's what I was trying to get at. You know, I wanted to make sure that we are still maintaining it as reclaimed water under this regulation. That's fine. I'm totally cool with that. I just wanted to make sure that that's the way everybody understood it. Now, if it does go off-site, I totally agree. You know, you have to have a discharge minimum. We've gone through that quite a few times, so that's totally clear and understood. But while it's on site and everything is still used, it's the reclaimed water. So, thank you.
yes, thank you. And just real quick, the for the ag rate piece, we do have guidance on that that we offer that Liz and Nathan developed. So there is guidance for calculating agronomic rate for landscapes, and that even includes non-traditional turf grass, so other types of landscape like xeriscape and native grasses and things like that. But so we can help direct you to that if needed, and perhaps make it more clear that we have that available for folks to keep as we go forward.
Right. I guess I just look at it as a lot of users probably are not going to have the technical, ability to be looking at some of those guidance and the rates and stuff like that. So if we just had a very, nice, concise, clear way of doing it, everybody can turn around and use the same one, whether you put it in the user plan to comply or wherever. It's just in one location. Everybody's on the same page. That's all my comment really was about. Is it's just keeping us all on the same page. We don't have to have any further discussion about things on it. That's all. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. All right. So if there's any more comments on this one, we'll take a quick poll. Thank you.
And Sherry has a question as well, although it looks like Meg might have gotten it. But Sherry asked, is there a way to say that given the water quality data, the ag rate can't be exceeded? Maybe this could be included in the UPC.
So if the treaters reclaim water is kind of at a certain level, then maybe, are you suggesting that then it wouldn't be required in the UPC to do the analysis? Is that what I'm hearing?
I wouldn't necessarily say that's the case ever. And this is Liz Lamont. There is a way in calculating the agronomic rate that your numbers are so low that calculation is extraordinarily easy. But no matter what, everybody needs to look at ag rate.
Thanks, Liz. Sherry, did that help?
Our guidance does kind of address situations where you could do a very simplified approach to ag rate analysis. And, as a treater, that works with the users, you could promote those tools. And we're also going to be looking at that and how that applies to some of the new uses as they come along. But, for example, the turf grass, there's very clear guidance. So I'd say take a look at the ag rate guidance. And if you have comments on areas that you think we could simplify it more for areas that could have a very simplified ag rate analysis that really is a kind of zero burden, you just kind of cut and paste, get back to Liz and I, and we can take into consideration those concepts.
This is Liz again. As Nathan said, if you have any problems, call me. I'm happy to walk you through the ag rate policy, but I did try and make it, I wouldn't say simplified. I would say I tried to make it as understandable for the layperson as possible.
All right, thanks everybody. We're gonna move on here. So the next topic would be a best management practice for signage, for this to be applicable to every use, which it is already, but it is a little bit vague in some areas, and in some areas it's very specific. And so what we were thinking for signage is to have a minimum signage requirements for any sign anywhere that would say reclaimed or recycled water, do not drink, and that maintenance, somehow word on there that maintenance should be done by trained personnel only. And then in some cases, licensed plumbers, for example, with toilet flushing, it is a requirement that licensed plumbers do the maintenance. So, and then some requirements for signage would be contingent upon use, and it could be specified in regulation and or the UPC or NOA. And so adequate signage, which is where the word I think that's in there now for most uses is could be more defined for specific uses. So for example, with food crops, for the last rulemaking, we put some very specific signage requirements in due to the high risk of that use. And so the idea would be that we could take a look at other uses and sort of determine some more similar specifics, maybe not quite as much specification as there is for that. I don't know. We haven't thought about it that far, but the idea would be that the requirements would be more clear in Regulation 84 for like where the sign needs to be or how many you need, so that compliance with the regulation would be easier. So I will open it up with that.
Hey, Brandy, again, this is John Hanzo at Aurora. Is this sort of going to be, I mean, are you thinking that this could also be like how we've gotten training set up within the reg? Where you talk about training and those that are, you know, really hands-on, like the irrigation specialists versus, you know, temporary people who might just have to work and be around it, and how their trainings also could be set up. Is that what you have in mind here?
I don't know if I'm seeing the similarity there. I think it's a little different from that. I mean, I think the signage would be more cut and dry than the education piece, maybe.
Well, would you have like a section A that says here's the minimum signage requirements, and that applies to every user? And then you would have qualified signage requirements based on a specific use. Is that would be like a subpart B? Okay, that's okay. Thank you.
And then Bridget Walsh has some comments in the chat as well.
Okay.
She'd like to point out she has never seen any signs in City Park that uses recycled water. And then since Denver Water does not test for anything including PFAS in their water, people who use the park should know the risks.
City Park doesn't use reclaimed water. And so I'll take that one just because that's about compliance, but I'll let permits address any PFAS comments.
First, I would say for the education piece, Bridget, one thing that we're going to focus on in our next meeting is education and training and things, sort of like developing more materials that are more informative about things like PFAS and other constituents in reclaimed water. and communicating risk about reclaimed water. We are going to focus on that in our next stakeholder meeting in September. We absolutely agree that it's important that that information be available and provided to folks.
And she would like to point out that it is reclaimed water that is baptized as waters of the state, but it is recycled water. And then would like to ask if Denver Water will be testing.
So just again, we've had this discussion, Bridget, and I do appreciate your concerns, but by law and regulation, it is not recycled water. It is subject to protections and other state regs for making sure beneficial uses of waters of the states are protected, but it does not fall under 84. So.
I think it's more a question of discharges to City Park Pond from that are regulated under our discharge permitting program.
And then just to note, Bridget, we will share the contact information for all the presenters. So if you'd like to have a more in-depth conversation about some of these concerns, that might be a great way to do it, just because I know Brandy did develop a pretty packed agenda.
And this is Asta Parker. Brandy, can you hear me now?
I can hear you much better.
Great. Okay, I dialed in for my phone this time. I was wondering, so after the minimum signage requirements and the perspective I'm coming from, and I think that Dave and a couple others might be interested in this based on the localized system. One thing that came up with Denver Water's localized system when we were doing signage, if you guys remember, is that the plumbing board and plumbing codes also have their own individual signage requirements. Mm-hmm. And there's local health, there's local health jurisdiction signage requirements as well. And so I was wondering if there was a way if we're going to go for a minimum signage requirement, which I don't think is a bad idea depending on the amount of things we need to fit in there. But it was really difficult for us to actually implement signage requirements that met all three of those requirements, because they were in conflict with each other at different points.
Interesting. Okay.
And so I was wondering if there was a way that we could kind of look through that, not only for localized systems, but also, I mean, even when we were talking about edible crops and school gardens and just the amount of information that needs to fit on there, and if it needs to be an 8.5 by 11, or what all it needs to say, and what size the font needs to be, and all of that. I want to make sure that we're kind of setting ourselves up for success, and not asking our customers to put in posters necessarily, unless they know up front that that's what they're going to do and they can plan for that. Mm-hmm. But this is, I mean, just kind of a practical side note that this has kind of this is a difficult thing for us to actually implement. And I would imagine that would happen for perhaps other uses that are coming about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think looking at what the other regulations require would be helpful. So we can certainly, I think we can take a look at that and think about that as we move forward. I mean, I think the really big thing we're trying to accomplish here is a minimum requirement that lets everybody know it's, reclaimed or recycled water, and that, and then also try to make it where, users and treaters know how many signs to have or where they should be, more clear, make that more clear. That's really the goal. But yeah, I mean, I think if we're going to be looking at very specific requirements, we should look at other regs and make sure we're not creating any problems there. So yeah.
Right. And the goal, and just to clarify, so I understand, the goal would be to not only say, a sign needs to say reclaimed or recycled water, do not drink, but those signs should be posted here, here, and here at a minimum, of this amount per distance or at a site. And then the maintenance by trained personnel only, that would, I'm guessing, be in another category that says that would be at access points where you would actually have access to the plumbing to work on it. But those wouldn't necessarily need to be on the same sign all over the property.
That's something we can think about too. Yeah.
Just a thought, because I'm also thinking about retroactive and just from a public, perception and from what's kind of practical and makes sense in the number of signs to replace in a given service area. I'm trying to look out a little bit for that. So thank you.
Yeah.
Randy, this is Donine. I just had an alternate maybe way to handle it, and this is just a suggestion on the contingent upon use requirements. I was thinking instead of going in and looking at each of the specific uses, it might make sense to group uses into risk categories instead of having to go through, okay, I've got a site that uses it for this use, and this use. They need these 3 different signs, but the overall site is all the same risk category. So all their signs would be covered under basically 2 areas, the minimum signage requirement and the contingent use requirements. So just an alternate way to look at it maybe.
Yeah, I like that. That is a good idea. And when we kind of think about that more in phase 2, that could be sort of a way that this is morphed or something. Yeah. Thank you. Any other comments on signage?
I think we have a poll for this one. If
We
you'd
do.
like to do that. Okay.
Yeah,
Would
let's
you like
do
me
it.
to launch that one?
Sure. All right, let's move on to the next one so we can get this, keep going here. So the last one would be regarding appurtenances and conveyances and the labeling of those. So things, you know, pipes, equipment, anything that transmits reclaimed water, stores reclaimed water. And we're not talking about the underground distribution system here. We're talking about like above ground irrigation systems and pipes and buildings and things like that. So pipes and equipment and conveyances must be labeled and be clearly distinct from potable water. So purple or, you know, be labeled as reclaimed water and be labeled as non-potable. And then for certain uses, there would be temporary labeling, and these could be specified in the reg or the NOA or the user plan to comply. We've seen this came up recently with oil and gas operations needing temporary labeling for lay flat hoses. And then the other thing we wanted to bring up in this was for irrigation systems that are converted from potable to reclaimed water. I think the way the regulation is written now is that when repairs are completed on the irrigation system, then the retrofit should be converted over to purple or labeled as reclaimed or distinct from potable. And in that event, you know, we think there's probably a lot of systems that may still have potable fixtures on them, if you will. And so in an effort to try to kind of maintain compliance with this regulation, but also an understanding of where potable and reclaimed water are differentiated, having treaters or users maintain a map of their current potable systems that are delivering reclaimed water, and kind of maintain the records of and tracking where they've done conversions on sprinkler heads and maybe where they haven't. So that could be really 2 topics in one slide here, actually. So why don't we really just kind of focus first on the labeling of appurtenances and conveyances and think about whether we think that can be consolidated for all uses, and what your thoughts are around that.
So Brandy, this is Donine. I just want to clarify that the proposal is actually to label these appurtenances reclaimed water and non-potable water. Both of those phrases have to be on them, or
The idea was,
or sample or
the,
statement again.
the idea would be that it is distinct from potable water as non-potable. I don't know that we're set on what term has to be, if a term has to be on the, the pipe, or if the fact that it's purple or a different color. I don't think we're really stuck on that specifically yet, but the idea would be that it is, distinguished as reclaimed water and non-potable water, non-drinking water.
And Brandy, this is Asta again. I have a similar comment that I made with the signage, when it comes to labeling here as well.
Mm-hmm.
When it's specific to our experience with the localized system and kind of dual pond building again with the labeling requirements, this also can be interpreted a lot of different ways in terms of frequency of labeling and how much there needs to be, and some more specific items on that front. So I would say that I think it's a good idea to just have something that says everything should be labeled. It should be distinct from the potable system. I totally agree with that. You need to be able to find the pipes and be able to trace things to where they go for all the different testing and to make sure it's safe. But some of the temporary labeling requirements and some other parts of the labeling give me pause for concern because of the diversity in uses that are now in Reg 84.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the idea for the temporary piece would be more so for that diversity, and that would be my intention, would be that temporary labeling when appropriate, right? Which is the case with the lay flat hoses. So that's sort of why that's there. Are you saying you're concerned about expanding temporary labeling to some of our existing uses?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that wasn't my intention. And I hadn't, but that's something to think about as well, as if that would be appropriate anywhere else. But
yeah, I want to make sure, I guess, that it's pretty specific about where that would be applied.
Yeah.
And that's one of those, I know, to Nathan's point about how some things aren't black and white, this is one that would be really, really easy, I could see in the future, to get to be difficult to meet, or to feel like you should meet and not really know and need an exemption or something like that. So
yeah, I understand that completely. Yeah, and the intent would really be that, like, it would pertain to one use, right? Like, or whatever uses it pertain to, it would be specified in the reg.
I haven't noticed anywhere in the reg other than, I'm sorry, this is Liz, other than lay flat hose, where we provided any type of alternative labeling. My understanding from when I initially started working with Regulation 84 was that some sort of purple labeling was required unless it was being grandfathered in which case everything had to be demarcated, or that purple piping absolutely was not available. And for a while this was true, for instance, at the Denver Zoo. They could not use handheld hoses because they could not find purple handheld hoses or purple sprayers. You can now, but that was and still is my understanding.
I mean, I think we're really not trying to change a whole lot about what's already required. I think we're kind of just trying to make it more clear and implementable. Sorry, somebody had a comment.
I did, yeah, sorry. I was just gonna mention that there's something in the chat.
Okay.
Eric Jorgensen asked if there was a time frame for systems to update their maps. He could see that as something that is pushed to the wayside during repairs and replacements.
There currently is not a time frame required. It just states that when making repairs, then retrofit so that it is distinct as reclaimed water. So we haven't really talked about making a time frame for that. More so just talking about it being, make sure that that the site is we understand that reclaimed water is being delivered through these potable fixtures. That's really the goal, and that's kind of known and recorded.
And Brandy, this is Asta again. Kind of following up on that, I actually think that having a time frame or knowing if it needs to be annual updates, or if it's something where if you guys were to call and say, hey, something came up and we want to know, we want an updated map of your system now, and something happened last week where we made a repair, I think that I'd like to know if the expectation, or if it's something that the division wants, or how others feel about kind of these continual updates, because they do get pushed to the wayside, unfortunately, sometimes when you're just trying to deal with the day-to-day. So I'm wondering if that could actually be a little bit more clear, so that we know that everybody's on the same page about when those updates will happen and kind of what the level of expectation or clarity is from the division to the treaters and to the users and such.
Okay, thank you.
This is Liz. I'm not entirely sure we could call these updates. The reason that I thought about adding records of maintenance is that I go and I inspect a lot of facilities that were grandfathered in, but they were grandfathered in shortly after the implementation of Regulation 84, and yet a lot of their apparatus still has not been updated, even though it looks very new to me. So that would be the purpose of the maintenance, is to say, no, we had it when we switched over to Reg 84. We haven't changed it out first. And some of those brass sprinkler heads at some Denver parks are a good example. Those things will never die.
All right. Are we ready to take a quick poll on this and move forward?
Hey, Brandy, this is John Hanzo again. Question on the appurtenances and conveyance, just as a more higher level of this. In what situations other than lay flat hose would you find appurtenances, conveyances being used? I'm not sure I understand. Are you talking about a large irrigation system at a farm? Or is there something more like what we've discussed for the oil and gas industry and their desire of using lay flat hose to, transport it across long distances? I just don't understand the need for some labeling on something that is more it's portable and temporary. I don't know. I'm trying to get my head wrapped around how and when this would be used.
Well, I guess, but the terms, what we mean is like that first bullet, just piping within the buildings, sprinkler heads, hose, nozzles, things like that. And again, it's already required that it be distinct. So maybe I'm not understanding your question.
You sort of answered part of it when you talked about the pipes and within buildings. I guess I was looking at it from a standpoint of the treater provides reclaimed water to a user, and then the user has their system, which generally is not exposed, excuse me, with the exception of, say, the use of a lay flat line. And I mean, I understand, and we agreed with the lay flat line, and those are non-potable lines. The equipment is sold and rented as non-potable, and, you know, putting a signage on that is label on that to definitely distinguish that this is a reclaimed water within the pipe. I understood that. I didn't understand that you were actually getting at stuff more for like localized treaters and the gardens and stuff like that. I guess I didn't think about those, and that's what I was asking for, was kind of clarification of you know, when this would be used and why it was needed.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's always been a requirement in the reg to have that sort of thing distinct as reclaimed water, like I said. And so this is just really an attempt to consolidate it into one BMP for all equipment, and, you know, make it easy to know what you're supposed to do in terms of labeling that equipment. I mean, we're not talking about purple toilets here. So we don't need purple toilets, but
I think those would be very pretty.
Yeah, you know, the plumbing that goes into the toilet doesn't need to be, you know, labeled. So that's kind of what we're talking about. So, all right, well, let's do our poll on this real quick because we have a lot more to cover in less than an hour now. So.
And we do have a comment from Sherry as well.
I'm sorry, yes.
She thinks mapping is a completely different conversation. This seems very onerous to me. I mean, we have our users and distribution pipe is known, but if the user reroutes their irrigation pipe, that would be hard to track.
Okay. That's noted.
And I will launch the poll.
Okay. And I guess just to be clear for the poll, we're asking about the labeling piece and we're not asking a question around the irrigation system retrofits right now. So it's just about labeling. Okay, looks like everyone stopped, so we'll stop now, and so we can move on to the next. Okay, yay, Jamboard. So Mary Ann, do you want to take it from here?
Sure. So I jumped again. Let me just copy and paste the Jamboard link. I think everyone here has had practice with Jamboard. You know, we've used it the past couple of stakeholder meetings already, but I will bring it up on screen here for those who aren't familiar with it. Hey, Caitlin, it says, for some reason, it says you cannot start screen share while the other participant is sharing. Do I have host rights?
Do I need to stop sharing here?
You should have host rights, but yeah, try it now.
Yeah, thank you. Usually I can take over, Brandy. All right. So let me expand this. So, you know, how you work Jamboard is it's basically your online whiteboard, and there's a sticky note right here in the corner. It's 4 icons down on the left. And what you'll do is we just want to collect people's thoughts. So what we're just going to take roughly 2 to 3 minutes for everyone to just start jotting down ideas. So I'm just going to do a quick test here, and all you have to do is press save. And then John, I think the last meeting you were the one who brought up the images icon, so I'll get that up. So if you see comments that other people are doing, then you can give them a thumbs up, and you can copy and paste this thumbs up as you see fit. So for example, I'll be just putting that here. Oh, nope, not thumbs down. So I'm going to copy and paste that and then move it over here. And so we can then count how many people are in agreement with certain comments. If anyone's having problems, feel free to chat us. You're able to just maybe chat me specifically if you want. But yes, we'll just be taking a couple minutes to do this. Brandy, do you want to maybe talk through, walk them through kind of what information you're looking for as they're developing these comments?
That would be helpful, right? What are you developing ideas about? So in Regulation 84, as everyone knows, there's Section 84.9. We call all of those additional conditions required. And then in other areas, we call them best management practices. And essentially they're practices that are required, that are tied to specific uses. And so we want to come up with a universal term to use throughout the regulation so we're not switching between additional conditions and best management practices, and that also makes sense for what they are. So a couple of ideas that we came up with are implementation requirements, because that is what they are. That's not a very fun thing to call them, but it is an idea. And then the other would be user requirements, because really the users are the ones who are implementing these for the most part. So those are just a couple of ideas, but we do want to hear your ideas. And again, the goal is to change the name to something that we stick to, that's consistent. So then when we're in these meetings, we're not confusing, calling it multiple different things. So I guess we'll do, what do you think, Marianne or Caitlin, like 10 minutes on this, or?
I know we spent a lot of time on those initial slides, so let's spend about 5 minutes to start.
Okay.
Let's just see where people go.
Great.
All right, everyone, I'm going to give just a couple minutes left. We'll be closing this right at 2:20. I'm seeing a little bit of a slowdown, actually. So maybe I'll give it, maybe not until 2:20, but maybe at 2:19. I'll give it one more minute left. All right. Let's see, a couple more movements. So I feel free to continue to add to this, you know, as we move the meeting on. But since we are a bit behind schedule, which is totally fair, with these are important conversations we needed to have in those prior slides. Brandy, I'm just going to ask you, are there any of these comments that don't really, that you need more clarification on? I know you're using this as a tool to gather what people are thinking of, how many people are in agreement with them, and then you can take that back. So knowing what sticky notes might not make sense to you as you read them, and then we can get clarification from most stakeholders right now.
Nothing is jumping out as not making sense, so.
All right, then we are going to close this Jamboard. Normally we would have a little bit more discussion on this, but again, given time, we should move on. So I am going to share my presentation.
Right, I'm back. Am I sharing now? Yes, okay. Great, thank you everybody so much. All of that was really helpful from before, and then these ideas are great, and so we will be taking those back. So last meeting we discussed some impoundment language to put into Regulation 84. The goal of that wasn't, it's not a new requirement, it was just making requirements around impoundments clear in the regulation. And the only real change that we've talked about internally about making is the way it was worded before. It kind of put the onus on the treater for impoundments that might be on a user site. So we sort of separated it out so that, you know, treaters are responsible for the impoundments that extend from their distribution system, and then users would be responsible if they own and operate an impoundment that has reclaimed water on it, in it. So that's really the only major difference. And again, it doesn't change any requirements at all. It's just we're trying to make the language clear. So if there is any comment, if there are any comments on this, let's talk about it real quick. But otherwise, we'll move on to the next one, which is a lot. Okay, I'm going to move on because of the time, but if you do have comments, clearly, you know, you can contact me anytime. Okay, so the next role, the next topic is about treater, site manager, and user roles and responsibilities. So when I was doing my interviews with folks, I heard a lot of that it's not clear necessarily what these roles and responsibilities are in the regulation the way it's currently written. So what we're really trying to achieve here is how can the regulation be more clear, and how can the regulation kind of give you better tools or teeth to manage a reclaimed water program. So starting with treaters, some of the challenges that I heard that treaters have are getting users to understand the reasons for the requirements in Regulation 84, getting them to understand the importance of making corrective actions on site. And I heard some ideas like, what if the treaters had the permitting authority? And basically also that it could be more clear in regulation in terms of how to enforce the regulation. It just said my internet connection was unstable. Can you guys still hear me?
Yep,
You're
you sound good.
Okay, good. Okay, so all that being said, I just wanted to go through real quick the treater current responsibilities. We're not intending to change the responsibilities by any means, but the treater is responsible for the letter of intent, complying with the treatment and the standards for the category of water to be met, having a UPC for all users, having a reuse system management plan that includes how they will educate users, how they will oversee user compliance, and how they will terminate service if the user fails to comply. They must comply with other regulations and ensure that users comply with Reg 84 and the Notice of Authorization. There are also additional responsibilities for treaters in Section 8410 right now for non-commercial crops, edible hemp, and resident controlled crops, basically just ensuring that site managers are educated. And there are also some more specific inspection requirements for those specific uses. And then they are responsible for monitoring, record keeping, and reporting. And then there are some localized system requirements that are a little different and also currently specified in Reg 84, and then responsible for reporting violations to the division. So we're not proposing that any of that would change. What we're trying to do is make it more clear. So, would it be helpful if there was a separate section in Reg called treater responsibilities? What if we added some enforcement authority into Reg 84, such as, a compliance schedule and reinspection specifics? Or what if there was some other enforcement piece like a fine? I don't know if we're even allowed to do that, but just trying to come up with some ideas on how you could have more teeth when you're trying to implement the program. Another idea that we have is we could add some specific inspection requirements. So a percentage of your users inspected per year, or, and maybe more inspections would be required for higher risk uses, which is kind of already what we have. So all of that being said, another idea that we have, so sorry that we're going to jump right into this other idea and then we'll have a discussion. We have a model that is currently practiced by one of our treaters, and it is basically, we call it treater is the user. In this instance, in this circumstance, the treater has complete responsibility for the user's requirements. And so through the treater directly, through direct implementation or oversight, the treater is the user's point of contact. The division would receive inspection reports from the treater rather than doing inspections. The treater is responsible for enforcing violations. And then some circumstances, if a user is not complying, then they would have to report it to the division after a certain amount of time. And with this model, there's not a user plan to comply for every user. There's one blanket user plan to comply for different uses. So they have a landscape irrigation UPC, and they have a commercial use UPC. And so under those UPCs, they submit to us annually a list of addresses or parcels that are currently under each use. So anyway, that's just an option that we wanted to throw out as something that treaters could opt into. We could see this maybe benefiting places that have less number of users, maybe not, maybe even larger amount of users. So not sure, but just wanted to throw that out there as an option. So all of that being said, we'd like to just open up a discussion on any of those ideas I just talked about, as well as ideas that you all have on how we could better clarify the roles and responsibilities for treaters in reg.
Brandy, this is Damien with Denver Water. Can you go back to the first slide of this section?
Yeah, for treater responsibilities here.
Yeah, that one.
Okay. The way I see it is that a lot of this stuff is embedded into the administration section, which is 84.6. But then a lot of other stuff is kind of throughout regulation, like with local systems. And, you know, we're really just looking for ideas on how it could be, I guess, maybe consolidated in one place or more clear.
Hey everybody, this is Liz, and I thought I'd just throw in a little bit on this. And I'm sorry, I just got done eating some frozen grapes, and so my tongue is a little numb. A little bit of this was my idea when I was talking with Brandy about some of the interviews that she had had with treaters and users. It was just kind of more along the lines of let's send it up the flag, see if anybody salutes it. But one of the things I noticed from a compliance perspective, and let's pick a really big treater. Let's say City of Westminster. So we could, City of Westminster could take on, if they wished, the authority to be responsible for all of their users. No more treater user plans to comply. The users plan to comply filed with us. The users would have to have user plan to comply, but they might be called something else because they would be more along the line of customers. And this would allow City of Westminster to treat their users as customers. And the big part of that would help was that we would no longer need certification statements, I don't believe. On the other hand, the kind of the downside of that is now City of Westminster is completely responsible for the use of all of their users. So if I go and do an inspection of 5 sites and they all have compliance issues, then the treater now has 5 compliance issues. Another opportunity I kind of saw was super users. And I guess the best example I could think of that was a school district or maybe a park system that rather than giving a user plan to comply to every park, we might give a user plan to comply to City of Bostonia Parks Department. And one of the best reasons I can think of for that is that if I go and look at one site that is kind of under an organization, that one site is going to give me a good indication about how all the other sites are going to look. And so how that would work theoretically, because these are just ideas that I was kind of throwing out. There would be the treater, and then comes in that part with the site manager. for the City of Bostonia Public Schools. And then they are responsible, they are the user, and they are responsible for keeping their customers or their sites within compliance. Okay, so I am all done talking now.
Thanks, Liz. So what are you guys' thoughts on things like inspection requirements being a little bit more defined? Or adding a enforcement authority? Would that be helpful or hindrance or nothing?
This is Dave Takeda. You know, I think it would be potentially helpful to have I'm looking at slide 25 where you have your division ideas. I think it would be helpful to have some treater responsibilities kind of maybe more clearly laid out, just isolated instead of kind of within other sections. I know some of my clients would definitely like some more enforcement authority. Some of it is their own problems. They kind of create their own problems. They're unwilling to, do what they're already allowed to do, which is shut off water or impose fines, but that's because they don't have to. If there was something that maybe forced them to, then they don't necessarily have to be the bad guy. Of course, that means you guys are the bad guy, but
we're used to it.
So that would be helpful. I know that's something that their staff is, because they have a lot of users who are just continually non-compliant on a variety of things. And not sure on the inspection requirements. I mean, again, one of my clients, they inspect each site every year. That's about 30 and growing. I don't think they would mind if that was a lesser number. So, I mean, those are kind of my thoughts on this.
Yeah. I think with the inspection piece, there is a resource thing to talk about sort of too, which when we talk about site manager, we're kind of, that might help with that, but we don't know yet. So,
Dave, the site that I was talking about that kind of gave me the idea for this was Meridian. And Meridian is in kind of a special position because they have an IGA with all of their customers that if they don't do what they're supposed to do, their water is going to be shut off. Now, I don't see any way the division could make the treater make the user do what they're supposed to do via fines or shutting off their water or anything like that. But perhaps the perspective that if you're looking at one large entity and 10 customers that just won't toe the line, then you're looking at 10 issues of non-compliance for the treater. Now all of a sudden you've got a little bit more strength behind you. You can go back to these users or these customers and say, you're ruining it for all of us. So perhaps in your city code or whatever, that gives you a little more teeth.
Hey guys, this is Asta. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Dave.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to change topics, so if you want to wrap it up, we can.
No, I'm good.
Okay, thanks. Sorry. I was wondering if you guys, Liz and Brandy and others, if you envision the super user, which I do like that term a lot, but if you envision kind of a super user or a conglomerate of locations under one umbrella as an optional item. So for example, with Denver Parks, could we ask Denver Parks if they wanted to participate in that and put all of their parks underneath? or would it be, or are you envisioning it to be perhaps a requirement for anyone with 3 or more sites or 10 or more sites, or how would that work?
I'm not sure. This is Liz again. I don't know that we ever looked at it as a requirement because, you know, Janet Keeler, I'm not sure how many people are old enough to remember when she was kind of running the show. But when I first brought up the idea of a bifurcated program more years ago than I care to remember, she said, okay, well, if they want to do one, it has to be either or. But my thought of a super user, the big if is, can you find one person who can and will take responsibility for the sites under them? So I don't necessarily see a landscape company, for instance, becoming a super user because they have no skin in the game. But for instance, if Denver Parks wanted to become a super user, whether or not they had to and to continue under the Denver water system would be up to you, but it would not be something that the division forced them to do.
And kind of along those same lines, but going back to some interesting points that Dave made, which I, of course, wasn't thinking about it from the perspective he was. So thanks, Dave, by the way, for giving that input about when it would help to have a little bit more teeth to enforce things. On our end, and a couple of things that I saw come through the chat, I'm wondering if, you know, if the idea of this is to simplify or to provide the treaters with the option to have more enforcement capabilities if they want, or if this is something that you're imagining all of the treaters would take on, if this would be in addition to what we kind of already do for compliance and to work with our users.
I don't see how we could force you to have more more punishment, as it were, or oversight, or Randy, what's the word I'm looking for? More control. I think it would give you more ability to go back to your governmental agencies, the ones that are running the show, and saying, we now have a lot more motivation to do that. Because again, if Denver Parks is one entity and I go to 5 parks and I find 5 violations, now Denver Parks has 5 violations. And well, I mean, I'm not exactly sure how then that would transpose to the treater. Probably the same it does simply, but it would give the treater a better way to concentrate their resources.
So also, we're kind of providing this treater as the user as an option, but the thing about it is the way that we're describing it and talking about it is sort of leads into the next area of discussion, which is about a site manager, which is sort of like a super user. So the lines are getting a little grayed here, but we can move on to site manager. I think we probably should really soon. So if we just, you know, if anybody has any ideas on how to clarify the roles and responsibilities for treaters, if you could just quickly share them, then we will move on to the next topic.
Brandy, I'm not sure if this got mentioned already. Sherry did have a comment. Essentially, she said, I think it could be an option, but shouldn't be absolute. And I think she's referring to fines and enforcement.
Okay.
So just wanted to share that.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Brandy.
Mm-hmm.
Brandy, this is Bob from Meridian.
Hey.
How you guys? Hey, thanks for the compliments about the program. And if you guys wanted to build in and actually put that in the regulation that you could be treater as user, that would probably at least advance it forward a little bit in the regulation, because I think right now we currently exist under that variance, right?
No, Bob, you can have, the treater can be a user.
Right. But I'm saying that condition that we have, that you're referring to, that's been granted under a variance. If we could just have it under the regulation, and then we would have the bifurcated system like you referenced, Janet, but at least it's in the regulation. So if a large entity or small entity wanted to move forward with that, it would already be there without having to do a variance.
No, it's already in the regulation, Bob. You don't need a variance anymore.
Was that right?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Glad that got cleared up. Okay, anything else, please call me or email me on this particular topic. So the next thing we want to talk about is site managers. So to give a little background, we adopted this site manager last year for hemp and food crops. And really it's to provide a tiered level of oversight. And the site manager is a person who essentially assists the treater in the division with user adherence to the requirements and the regulation. And it's the main point of contact for the treater in the division for a certain site. And so, we added this because of the nature of non-commercial food crop sites and things like that. Just having a lot of different community members participating in a garden, for example. We wanted one user to kind of be the main point of contact and also have responsibility for making sure that the other users are following the requirements and are informed and educated about the requirements. So kind of the goals are, hopefully improve compliance with Regulation 84, improve a higher level of awareness amongst users, be the main point of contact for the treater, but also the users. And this, having site managers could help with the user turnover piece where, we get, turnover with HOA managers or landscape architects that are, switched out over the year that don't wind up understanding what reclaimed water is by accident, basically. So in the idea and in light of having site managers, the division has decided internally that we could conduct an annual training for site managers and users and any really NOA holder, I guess. And so that is something that we can talk about more when we talk about education in our next meeting, but just to put that out there for now, that this is something that we are willing to commit to if it would be helpful, and especially if we think about having site managers. So the site manager role could be, a representative that is as knowledgeable about Regulation 84 as we all are, as treaters and regulators, or at least the sections that pertain to what they're using reclaimed water for. The site manager role would be a high level of oversight. So just like we have now, there would be for the specific uses, there would be some inspection responsibilities and enforcement responsibilities, ensuring that users adhere to the requirements and conduct some level of education and training that wouldn't displace the treater's education program or the divisions. And this is kind of where the lines were bleeding a little bit with the treater as the user. So the site manager could be a person that is very high level. So it could be a Denver Parks representative for all the parks. It could be, the regional manager of Cocal Landscape in Westminster, or it could be maintenance personnel, the one individual that takes care of all of Liz's coin-op laundries in Denver. In some cases, though, it may be appropriate to have a lower level representative, like at a community garden, due to the nature of the community garden and kind of how users are on that site. It could be at the lower level a person that is responsible for maintaining the disinfection residual for a toilet flushing site, or it could be the manager of a hemp farm or commercial farm. So sort of this is kind of really like broad ideas that we're throwing out there, but we're really kind of trying to figure out, well, hold on, let me finish. We think that a site manager could solve some of the issues that were raised by some of the treaters during our interviews, in terms of, treaters not having enough resources for education and enforcement and sort of boots on the ground at use sites. The site manager could potentially take on that role for just having more of a presence. And with regards to certification statements, perhaps this would lessen that load, and only the site manager would have to sign on for all their users under them. It could also help with the deficiency in education, kind of getting back to the user turnover piece. And so if there's a site manager that is more involved and on site anyway, to be sort of the one to help educate folks as they come in as new or whatever. So what we want to talk about with you all now is do you like the idea of having a site manager for all uses? The minimum requirements, despite everything I just said, would be, a dedicated person that's highly educated and has some level of authority and some sort of responsibilities. So there's the big question.
This is Dave Paquetta. I think it would be great if there were site managers, as I represent treaters. It would be great to have, just a few people and more knowledgeable people to communicate with. But I don't see the users wanting to pay for that. Some of our sites is like a Panda Express. Literally, it's just Panda Express. They're one of the users. I don't see them having any interest in paying for this. Same with like a small dental office. I mean, some users might, but they generally have knowledgeable people. Like RTD has knowledgeable people that we communicate with, so they kind of already have a site manager. But some of the small users, I'm not sure they would be wanting to fund this.
Yeah, and I think that I want to say that we wouldn't expect that a new person really be hired. It would just be dedicate the current user to that role if need be. And then kind of with the Panda Express thing, like would it be more appropriate for the landscape folks that actually work on the irrigation system to be the like user or site managers associated to that, rather than the Panda Express? I don't know if I'm stepping over legal things right now, but somebody will tell me if I am. But I guess, in my opinion, like the person who works at the Panda Express isn't going to be working on the irrigation system. So
yeah, my experience with like Panda Express, for example, is they just set it and forget it, and they don't necessarily have someone who is overseeing. They have a relatively small site. So I know, my clients a little bit, they might be unique, but they have several sites. Buffalo Wild Wings, for example, is another one. And while they may have someone who comes out periodically to make a repair or something, they don't necessarily have a landscape contractor who has a set program where they have a very specific scope every year, and included in that is to help them, be compliant with Reg 84. So for them, it would kind of be the same thing. Okay, yeah, they might designate someone, but that turnover is also, oh, hey, next year we're going to use someone else, or we're going to use my brother-in-law or whatever. So we're still, I think, going to have that same type of situation, unless they would go hire someone more, more informed with Reg 84, and I just don't think they're going to do that.
I see. And I must have overstepped some legal boundary there when I said the landscaper could be the site manager for a Panda Express. So forgive me for that.
I think that's something that we're still thinking about, though, right?
I was just told that was way off, but I said that. Okay. Don't listen to me anymore.
This is Damien with Denver Water. I'd like to echo all Dave's comments. I mean, sometimes these contractors get fired, after the season or even during the season. So you could have a period where there was no site contact. And from a broader perspective, I think it's potentially a good tool to increase compliance, but it seems to me it'd be tricky if it was a mandate.
Okay.
Well, someone has to be responsible for every site all year long, every site.
Yeah, maybe have
I think
a legally responsible party, right?
yes, but there also has to be a site contact. So in this case, I believe you have Damien, I can't ever, James Lockheed. Is he really the person that we should all go to if there's a site that has a leak?
Well, he's not the legally responsible party for any of our users, but I get your point.
Yeah, I just think it's something, this is Dave again, I just think it's something that's constantly in flux, and we encourage our users to have someone who fills this role. It is usually the site contact, and oftentimes it is a landscape contractor or irrigation contractor, but they do change quite frequently, and it's just, unfortunately, it's one of our burdens that every year we go through and contact our users and make sure we have information that is current, but we just also understand that about a quarter of them are likely to change, whether it's the legal contact, the legally responsible person, or the site contact. One or both of them changes in a good number of our sites every year. So it would be great, but again, unless they're going to want to pay someone to do that and be there year by year, I just don't see the users, a good portion of the users wanting to spend that type of money.
Well, and Dave, I just go back to the concept that there's supposed to be a legally responsible person for the treater and for the site all year long. So if they're leaving and so forth, and I don't see how this makes it may not make it any easier, but it shouldn't make it harder.
Yeah, but again, I think if you're trying to maintain consistency, and if you have a third party, a consultant or someone who is there, it's still a cost that I don't think users are going to, a lot of users are going to want to pay for.
Okay. So it sounds like it's like, sorry, go ahead, whoever.
Sorry, Brandy, I was going to echo a bit of what Dave was saying, and then also just say, in the spirit of, I know that the goal is to maintain public health through all of this, but in the spirit of wanting to expand water reuse across the state, and I feel like I'm putting on more of a work go hat here, in the spirit of wanting to do that for different folks and what they're saying about the users being willing to pay or actually take it on, I feel like some of the information we already get back, which is part of what this entire process is for, I think, is to simplify the reg to make it easier on treaters and users so that recycled water projects, can go off more seamlessly while protecting public health. And I see this as being a barrier to implementation for a lot of folks. I think that although we can meet, I'm just looking at the slide that's up now, we can meet the dedicated person and they have some authority and oversight responsibilities. They're required to do training. They're required to come and meet us in person when we do inspections. They're required to report things if there's issues. I think this highly educated piece in the middle, I don't see how we could possibly do a training program that's rigorous enough to meet, them knowing everything about Reg 84 with the amount of turnover if we want one specific site manager, because some users do send multiple folks and then there's some continuity in there. So I think that the piece about them knowing the ins and outs kind of what their specific uses are for Reg 84, we can try and do that, but being able to keep up with that on just a day-to-day basis with hundreds of users would be kind of tough.
It is still the requirement, though.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not saying we shouldn't try, but having the same
really, I think one part of
the hard.
I think one part of the context here does need to be that, and I will let Nathan and Liz talk about this more than I can, but I mean, as we've talked about before, I mean, we do, the levels of noncompliance in this program are very high, and they're very high compared to any of our other discharge permitting for instance, our discharge permitting programs. And that is very troubling, I think, to the division. So that, you know, I think that absolutely needs to be part of this conversation. You know, and we're looking at ways to kind of do things that work for the treaters, work for the users, but also really get to that question of getting, you know, better levels of compliance with this program.
And then,
So has that been part, Meg, of the discussion? And is that maybe more of the question that we're answering here with the site manager is, and I think this might be something that we kind of take and think about offline, and we can send comments back to you guys, but is part of the ask here then not just about the site manager, but about what ideas we might have to maintain better levels of compliance and relationships with users for treaters?
Really quick, Meg, before you respond, we have just a couple minutes left. We recognize that this is a pretty big topic, and that we'll have to probably get to this another time. So Meg, go ahead and finish your thought, but we are gonna have to close this up.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is yes. And, you know, Nathan and Liz, if you wanted to jump in here, but I think as part of this, you know, kind of rewrite that we're looking at, I think if you all have ideas about how we can improve this pretty, you know, abysmal level of compliance, we would absolutely love to see those and have those conversations.
And just to kind of real quick here, you know, the framework that this program was originally built on was really the concept that the treaters would maintain the compliance of the users, and the main relationship with the users would be maintained between the treater and the user, you know, and there was a strong interest in the treaters, and the program was developed to maintain that customer relationship. And that's what the program was really resourced at. And that's, you know, one reason why we, you know, have, you know, one compliance oversight person for over 500 sites now. If we want to continue that framework, I do think we need to find a solution to get that to be more effective. You know, especially as we go into potential uses that could have more risk of impact resulting from non-compliance. We're going into things such as edible food crops and stuff. You know, another framework, other option would be completely to turn the framework on its head, but I don't know if that's going to be a feasible solution, you know, because then we're really looking at having a statewide oversight rate well beyond where we're even in the vicinity of, you know, with over 500 users. So yeah, I think this is a good conversation. So we're coming up with solutions as part of it, but if there's solutions we haven't thought of that would help drive a sustainable statewide compliance with this framework, we want to hear them.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
All right, everyone. Oh, Brandy, sorry.
Hijack it all the way. It's fine.
So we are right at 3 p.m. and one of my goals with stakeholder meetings is always to end on time. So we recognize this conversation is not done. And Brandy, I'm going to be putting this out there that I think the next meeting we're going to have to make it longer. We originally planned for September 24th from 1 to 3 p.m. But I want to give stakeholders the heads up now that we are going to probably require even an additional 2-hour meeting. These are important conversations to have. And I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. I think we'll either be extending that September 24th meeting so that it goes throughout the rest, you know, the latter half of the afternoon, so more like the 1 to 4, perhaps 1 to 5 time frame, or we'll have to check our calendars and see if we have an additional meeting. But that's all to be determined. I'm saying that out now with no confirmation from Brandy. So sorry, Brandy, if I'm jumping on toes.
So something needs to happen. One of those two.
Okay. All right. Well, we do appreciate these conversations. They are robust, and that's what we're looking for. So this engagement is awesome, and we sorry we weren't able to get to everything today. But we will make sure we get to it in the future. So please stay tuned through our stakeholder website. We'll link to them in the chat. We'll keep on a couple more minutes so that those who are leaving will see the chats, the feedback forms, and the links that we're sharing. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Meg or Brandy, say any last words?
Just thank you. That's all. I really appreciate this feedback. It was really helpful to hear all of this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone.